The sun was dipping low, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, as a sleek black luxury car came to a sudden stop on a lonely, dusty road outside the city. The air was thick with heat, and the faint smell of burning rubber. From the car stepped Mr. Haynes, a man whose expensive suit and golden wristwatch spoke of a life untouched by struggle. He kicked at the tire in frustration, muttering under his breath about wasted time. For a man used to being obeyed, even a minor inconvenience felt like an insult. Just a few meters away stood a small mechanic's shop, its walls faded and tools scattered, the kind of place he would normally never notice. Inside, a young mechanic named Eli worked with quiet focus. His hands stained with oil, his face calm despite the day's exhaustion. When he heard the sound of the car horn echoing sharply, he looked up and saw the wealthy stranger waving impatiently. Mr. Haynes shouted, "Hey, you there? Get over here and fix this thing." His voice carried arrogance, the tone of someone who expected the world to move at his command. Eli didn't react to the rudeness. He simply wiped his hands on an old cloth, took a slow breath, and walked toward the car. The closer he got, the clearer the contrast between them became, one man surrounded by symbols of success, the other by signs of hard work. Mr. Haynes frowned, tapping his foot, watching Eli like he was just another tool to be used. "Do you even know how to fix a car like this?" he asked, half mocking, half doubtful. Eli didn't answer right away. He crouched down, opened the hood, and studied the engine with quiet concentration. His calmness seemed to irritate the rich man even more. "Well, how long is this going to take?" Mr. Haynes demanded, glancing at his watch as if every second loss was a crime. Eli spoke softly, his tone respectful but firm. "I'll do what I can, sir, but rushing won't make the machine heal faster." Something in his voice carried weight of patience that didn't come from weakness, but from understanding. The wind picked up a little, stirring dust around their feet, and for a brief moment, Mr. Haynes felt a strange discomfort he couldn't explain. There was something about Eli's quiet confidence that unsettled him, something that didn't fit his usual view of the world. As the mechanic worked, tightening bolts and checking circuits, Mr. Haynes watched, half annoyed and half curious. The road was silent, except for the clicking of tools and the occasional sigh from the engine. In that silence, an odd tension filled the air, as if something important was about to happen. Something that would challenge more than just a broken car. Mr. Haynes didn't know it yet, but this roadside delay was about to fix something far deeper than his vehicle light was about to test his pride, and it would begin with one man's calm hands and another's restless impatience. As Eli worked beneath the open hood, the sound of his tools clicking against metal filled the quiet air. The heat still hung heavy, but he didn't seem to mind. His focus was steady, his hands moving with practiced skill. Mr. Haynes stood nearby, arms crossed, his polished shoes already dusty from the road. His irritation grew with every passing minute. He glanced around the small workshop, a worn-out sign, an old stool, a few scattered tools, and let out a short laugh. "You fix cars? I build companies," he said, his tone dripping with pride. "We're not the same." The words cut through the air like a blade. Eli paused for only a second before continuing his work, pretending not to hear, but deep inside, the remark stung. He had heard things like that before from people who thought hard work was something to be looked down upon. Yet, unlike most, Eli didn't respond. He believed silence could speak louder than anger. Still, his quiet strength only seemed to annoy Mr. Haynes more. The rich man smirked and continued, "You know, I could buy this whole place if I wanted to. Probably make more money selling the land than you'll ever earn fixing these old cars." His words were sharp, meant to humiliate, to remind Eli of the distance between their worlds. But Eli only said, "Maybe, sir, but I'm not selling." There was no anger in his voice, just calm certainty. A few steps away, Sitting on a wooden bench was Marcus, a man in his 50s, with gray hair and strong, calloused hands. He was Eli's neighbor, sometimes his helper, and always his friend. Marcus had come by to share a cold drink after work, but now he sat quietly, watching the exchange. His expression hardened as he listened to the arrogance in Mr. Haynes's voice. His jaw clenched, and his fists slowly curled, but he didn't move. Not yet. He had seen how words could spark trouble, and he didn't want to make things worse for Eli. The sun dipped lower, and the golden light stretched across the shop floor, catching the reflection of Mr. Haynes's watch, a symbol of power, gleaming over grease and grit. Strange, Mr. Haynes muttered, how people can be satisfied living like this. Eli's hand stopped for a moment, then he looked up, meeting the rich man's eyes. There was no anger there, just quiet pride. "It's not strange," Eli said softly. "Some people don't measure life by what they own." Mr. Haynes scoffed, but something in that calm reply unsettled him. Marcus leaned forward slightly, his eyes narrowing, ready to step in if the insults went too far. The air grew heavier with tension. The difference between the two men wasn't just about wealth anymore, it was about respect, about what truly defined worth. The moment hung in silence, the kind that comes right before something changes forever, and Marcus's stillness felt like the pause before a storm. Eli tightened the last bolt and wiped the sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. The sun was almost gone, leaving behind a dim orange glow that reflected off the freshly cleaned hood of the luxury car. He stepped back to admire his work for a brief second, then turned toward Mr. Haynes, who was pacing impatiently near the door. "It's done," Eli said quietly, holding out the car keys. Mr. Haynes barely looked at him. Without a word of gratitude, he reached into his wallet, pulled out a few crisp notes, and tossed them carelessly onto the work table. The money landed beside Eli's tools, with a dull flutter. "Keep the change," Mr. Haynes said with a smirk, his tone dripping with superiority. "You'll need it more than I do." The words hung in the air like smoke, bitter and heavy. Eli didn't move right away. His fingers rested on the keys, his expression unreadable. He had faced arrogance before customers, who saw his greasy hands and small shop as proof of failure, but something about this man's tone felt colder, more personal. Slowly, Eli lifted his eyes to meet Mr. Haynes's respect. He said softly, "Is worth more than money." His voice was calm, almost gentle, but the words carried a weight that made the air seem to still. For a moment, Mr. Haynes looked surprised. He wasn't used to people like Eli talking back. Usually, his wealth and position silenced others before they even tried. But Eli didn't seem afraid, and that quiet confidence irritated him more than any insult could. "Is that so?" Mr. Haynes said, taking a step closer. His smile faded, replaced by something sharper. "Maybe you should learn who you're talking to." Eli didn't flinch. His gaze stayed steady, his hands loose at his sides. Behind them, Marcus had been leaning against the doorway, but now he straightened, his expression darkening. He had seen this kind of moment before when pride met patience, and something dangerous began to stir in the space between. Marcus took a slow step forward, his boots crunching softly against the gravel. He didn't speak, not yet, but his presence alone seemed to shift the atmosphere. Eli noticed him and gave a small shake of his head, a silent plea to stay calm. The wind blew through the open shop, scattering the money across the floor like fallen leaves. For a long second, no one moved. Mr. Haynes looked down at the drifting notes, then back at the young mechanic who stood before him with quiet dignity. Something in that silence felt heavier than words, a reminder that respect could not be bought, and arrogance could not command it. Marcus's eyes flicked between them, his instincts sharp. He could sense that the next words, or even a single look, might turn the situation into something far more serious. The night deepened, and with it came a feeling that this was no longer about a car or a few bills. It was about pride, about the invisible lines between men, and about who would cross them first. Mr. Haynes stared at Eli for a long moment, then let out a mocking laugh that echoed through the quiet workshop. The sound was sharp and cold, cutting through the still air like a knife. "People like you should be grateful for whatever you get," he sneered. His voice filled with the confidence of a man who believed money gave him the right to look down on others. Eli's fingers twitched slightly, but he said nothing. His silence wasn't weakness, it was control. He knew words thrown in anger never fixed anything. Still, the insult burned. For a second, he looked down at his oil-stained hands. The same hands that had just brought the rich man's car back to life, and something inside him ached. Before he could even open his mouth to reply, another voice broke the silence, the voice strong and steady. "That's enough," said Marcus, stepping forward from the shadowed doorway. His boots hit the floor with a solid sound, and every step carried quiet authority. Mr. Haynes turned, frowning in surprise at the older man's boldness. Marcus wasn't tall or intimidating, but his presence filled the room in a way that made even the rich man pause. "People like him," Marcus said, nodding toward Eli, "keep your world running. You might have money, sir, but he has skill and dignity." His voice was calm, but beneath the calmness was steel. For the first time, the arrogance on Mr. Haynes's face faltered. He blinked, caught off guard by the unexpected confrontation. The air in the small workshop grew thick with tension. Even the faint buzz of insects outside seemed to fade away. Eli looked at Marcus, half worried, half grateful. He had never seen his quiet friend speak so firmly before. Mr. Haynes tried to regain his confidence, straightening his shoulders. "You're defending him?" he asked with disbelief. "Do you know who I am?" Marcus took another step closer, his eyes steady. "I don't need to," he said evenly. "Respect doesn't depend on who you are, it depends on how you treat others." The words hung in the air, heavy and unshakable. Mr. Haynes opened his mouth as if to reply, but no words came. The silence that followed was deep and almost suffocating. For the first time, the man who owned everything found himself speechless in front of two men who owned nothing but their integrity. The only sound was the faint hum of the night outside and the quiet creak of the hanging light above them. Eli could feel his heart beating faster, not from fear but from something else, something like pride. Marcus stood still now, his expression calm, his message already delivered. Mr. Haynes looked from one man to the other, realizing, perhaps for the first time, that money could not command respect, and silence could sometimes roar louder than power. In that charged moment, everything changed, the air, the balance, and maybe even the heart of the man who thought he stood above them all. For the first time that evening, the confident look on Mr. Haynes's face began to crack. The smirk that had carried his pride faded just a little, replaced by something uncertain. His eyes shifted from Marcus to Eli, as if trying to find the right words but failing. The silence that followed Marcus's statement hung heavy in the small workshop, broken only by the faint hum of the evening breeze brushing against the tin roof. Eli glanced at Marcus, his heart torn between gratitude and unease. He respected his friend deeply, but he didn't want this moment to turn into a confrontation. He wiped his hands on a rag, pretending to busy himself with tools, but his eyes betrayed his worry. "Marcus, it's all right," Eli said softly, his tone calm but pleading. Marcus, however, didn't move back. His voice, when he spoke again, carried the weight of a truth that had been waiting too long to be said. "Don't mistake humility for weakness," he said firmly. His gaze fixed on Mr. Haynes. The words were simple, but they cut deeper than any insult. They didn't shout or accuse. They revealed. For a moment, no one moved. Mr. Haynes turned slightly away, pretending to inspect his car, his expression tight. He wanted to seem unaffected, to act as if the mechanic and his friend were beneath his concern. But the truth had already reached him. He could feel an unfamiliar heaviness pressing at his chest. The echo of Marcus's words seemed to bounce inside his mind, repeating itself with uncomfortable clarity. He had spent years believing power came from success, from being above others, but now, looking at the two men standing in front of him, something felt wrong. Eli's calmness, his steady hands, his quiet respect, it all stood in stark contrast to the emptiness that success had brought. Mr. Haynes. Marcus's words weren't an attack. They were a mirror, and in that reflection, for the first time, Mr. Haynes saw his own arrogance. The confidence he had worn so easily began to feel like armor that no longer fit. He clenched his jaw, forcing a short laugh to hide the discomfort. "You two take things too seriously," he muttered, his tone uncertain. But even as he said it, the edge in his voice was gone. Eli looked up briefly and caught a glimpse of something human behind the man's polished exterior. Flicker of realization, maybe even guilt. Marcus didn't respond. He had said what needed to be said. The quiet settled again, thicker this time, filled with the weight of unspoken thoughts. Outside, the sun had finally disappeared, and the soft glow of dusk wrapped the workshop in half-shadow. Mr. Haynes turned back toward his car, his movements slower, less sure. For the first time, his steps didn't sound like command, they sounded like retreat. Something had shifted in him, a small but undeniable crack in the wall of pride he had built around himself. Neither Eli nor Marcus spoke. They didn't need to. The truth had already been spoken, and its echo lingered in the air, marking the beginning of a change that none of them yet fully understood. The road stretched long and empty as Mr. Haynes drove into the night. The hum of his car, the only sound filling the darkness. The headlights cut through the misty air, but his mind was far away from the road ahead. He couldn't stop hearing the words that had been spoken at the mechanic's shop. "Don't mistake humility for weakness." They echoed in his head, slow and heavy, like a truth that refused to fade. He gripped the steering wheel tighter, his jaw set, but deep inside, something was shifting. For years, he had built his life on the idea that success meant power and that power demanded distance from ordinary people. But tonight, that belief wavered. The images replayed in his mind, Eli's calm face, Marcus's firm voice, and the quiet dignity in both men that no amount of money could buy. He sighed, leaning back against the seat as the city lights began to appear in the distance. A strange discomfort grew in his chest, the kind that couldn't be silenced by logic or pride. As the car rolled to a stop at a red light, he caught his reflection in the mirror. For the first time, the confident businessman looking back at him didn't seem so certain. He looked older, more tired, like a man running from something he hadn't yet named. The silence in the car grew heavier, pressing on him until a memory surfaced, a voice from years ago, deep and familiar. "Never forget who helps build your comfort," his father had once said. Mr. Haynes could almost see him again, a broad-shouldered man with rough hands and kind eyes, wearing a faded blue uniform covered in factory dust. His father had worked long hours at the steel plant, saving every coin to give his son the life he never had. Back then, Mr. Haynes had promised himself he would climb higher, reach further, and never struggle the way his father did. But somewhere along that climb, he had forgotten the very people his father had taught him to respect. The light turned green, but he didn't move right away. He sat there, lost in the weight of that realization. The city around him looked different, now less like a kingdom he ruled, and more like a living network built by thousands of unseen hands. Workers, drivers, builders, mechanics. People like Eli. The thought unsettled him deeply. Maybe, in chasing wealth, he had lost something far more valuable: humility, compassion, and connection. He pressed his hand against the steering wheel, feeling an unfamiliar ache in his heart. It wasn't anger or shame exactly, it was something gentler, something like regret. As he finally began to drive again, the road ahead seemed uncertain. Not because he didn't know the way home, but because for the first time in a long while, he wasn't sure what home really meant. The city lights blurred in his eyes, and though he tried to blink them away, he couldn't tell if it was from fatigue or the quiet sting of tears he refused to admit were there. The morning sun rose gently over the quiet street, painting the sky with soft shades of gold. Eli was already at his shop, opening the shutters and arranging his tools like he did every day. The smell of oil and metal filled the air, familiar and comforting. He thought about the previous evening, about the rich man's arrogance and Marcus's bold defense. The whole scene replayed in his mind, but he brushed it aside, focusing on work. Just as he picked up a wrench, the sound of an engine broke the stillness. A sleek black car pulled up to the curb, the same one from yesterday. Eli frowned slightly, expecting another wealthy customer with too much pride and too little patience. He straightened his posture, ready for whatever complaint might come. But when the car door opened, it wasn't a stranger, it was Mr. Haynes. Only this time, there was something different about him. Gone was the sharp expression, the air of superiority. He stepped out quietly, dressed simply, holding 2 steaming cups of coffee. The gesture caught Eli off guard. Mr. Haynes walked over slowly, his steps hesitant but deliberate. "Morning," he said, his voice lower, softer. Eli blinked in surprise, unsure how to respond. "Morning, sir," he replied carefully, still half expecting sarcasm. But instead, Mr. Haynes extended one of the cups toward him. "Mind if I watch you work for a bit?" The question hung in the air, strange and unexpected. For a second, Eli thought he was joking, but the man's expression was sincere. "Sure," Eli said finally, nodding slowly, "if you don't mind the noise." Mr. Haynes gave a small smile, the kind that didn't carry pride but something closer to humility. He found a stool in the corner and sat down, watching quietly as Eli went about his work. From a distance, Marcus noticed the unusual scene while walking past the shop. He paused, narrowing his eyes in curiosity. Yesterday, that same man had spoken with arrogance and scorn. Now, he sat like a student, observing in silence, as if trying to learn something words couldn't teach. Eli kept working, but his mind was uneasy. He could feel Mr. Haynes's eyes on him, not in judgment this time, but in genuine curiosity. Every few minutes, the rich man asked simple questions about tools, about engines, about how Eli had learned the trade. There was no mockery in his tone, only quiet respect. "It's not as easy as it looks," Mr. Haynes said at one point, watching Eli adjust a stubborn bolt. Eli smiled faintly. "Most things worth doing aren't," he replied. The sound of their conversation mixed with the clinking of metal, creating an oddly peaceful rhythm. Marcus watched a moment longer, then smiled to himself and walked away, knowing something had changed. The man who had once looked down on others was now learning to look across, and though neither spoke of it, both men in the shop could feel it, a shift, a beginning, born from humility and a simple cup of coffee shared between 2 very different worlds. The morning moved slowly, filled with the soft sounds of metal clinking, engines humming, and the occasional murmur of conversation. Mr. Haynes sat quietly for a long time, watching Eli work, his coffee growing cold in his hand. There was something humbling about the way the young mechanic moved, steady, focused, and patient, like every turn of the wrench mattered. Without realizing it, Mr. Haynes began to feel a sense of respect for the man he had once insulted. After a while, Eli reached for a tool lying just out of his reach. Before he could stand, Mr. Haynes quickly bent down and handed it to him. "Here," he said simply. Eli glanced up, surprised by the gesture, but nodded in thanks. It was a small act, but it carried more meaning than words could. Minutes turned into hours, and the rhythm of the workshop seemed different that day, less mechanical, more human. Mr. Haynes began asking questions, not the kind that belittled, but the kind that showed genuine curiosity. "How did you learn all this?" he asked, watching Eli adjust a timing belt. "My father taught me," Eli replied, his tone soft but proud. "He said a machine is only as good as the hands that care for it." Mr. Haynes nodded slowly, his gaze thoughtful. The words reminded him of his own father, of lessons he had forgotten somewhere along the path of success. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was reflective. After a while, Mr. Haynes set the empty cup aside and took a deep breath. His voice, when he finally spoke again, was quieter than usual, stripped of its usual confidence. "I spoke badly yesterday," he said, each word slow and deliberate. "You didn't deserve that." Eli paused, looking at him for a moment, and then smiled faintly. "We all forget ourselves sometimes," he replied, his tone forgiving, not proud. The simplicity of his answers seemed to catch Mr. Haynes off guard. He had expected anger or coldness, but instead he found kindness and honesty that humbled him even more. Just then, Marcus appeared at the doorway, wiping his hands with a rag, a grin tugging at his face. Well, he said playfully, "look who decided to join the working class." His voice broke the tension, lightening the air instantly. Eli laughed under his breath, and even Mr. Haynes couldn't help but smile. "I suppose I had to see how the real world works," Mr. Haynes replied, surprising even himself with the warmth in his tone. Marcus chuckled, clapping him lightly on the shoulder. "Careful," he said, "you might start liking it." For the first time, all three men laughed together, the sound echoing softly through the small workshop. It wasn't loud or forced, it was real. The kind of laughter that comes when walls begin to fall and pride gives way to understanding. Outside, the day continued as usual, but inside that little shop, something had changed. Three men from different worlds had found common ground, not in wealth or status, but in respect, humility, and the quiet strength of forgiveness. Weeks rolled by quietly, and the small repair shop began to feel different, though no one could quite explain why. The air seemed lighter, the laughter more frequent, and even the regular customers noticed a change in the atmosphere. Mr. Haynes had started visiting often, his black car becoming a familiar sight outside the workshop. At first, people whispered, wondering why a wealthy man like him would spend time in a place filled with grease, oil, and hard labor. But to everyone's surprise, he didn't come with arrogance or orders. He came to listen, to learn, and to understand. He would stand beside Eli, asking about engines and tools, trying to grasp how every small piece came together to make something powerful. Sometimes, he would roll up his sleeves and help lift a hood, his once polished shoes now spotted with dust. Each visit chipped away a layer of pride he hadn't realized he carried, and each conversation built something deeper between the three men. Eli, at first cautious, began to see a real change in him, a man searching not for profit, but for purpose. Marcus often teased him lightly, calling him the fancy apprentice, and even Mr. Haynes would laugh, shaking his head good-naturedly. One afternoon, as the sun dipped behind the city skyline, casting golden light through the workshop's open doors, Mr. Haynes stood beside Eli, watching him work on an old truck. After a long pause, he said, "You know, I've been thinking." Eli glanced up, wiping his hands on a rag, waiting for him to continue. Mr. Haynes took a deep breath and spoke with a kind of quiet sincerity that was rare for him. "I want to help you expand this place," he said. "Add better tools, more space, maybe even hire a few more hands. Not charity," he added quickly, meeting Eli's eyes. "A partnership, one built on respect." The words hung in the air, carrying the weight of something real and unexpected. Eli didn't answer right away. He studied Mr. Haynes for a long moment, as if searching for any trace of pity or pride, but he found none. Finally, a slow smile spread across his face. "Then we'll do it right," Eli said. "No shortcuts, no favors. Just honest work." Mr. Haynes nodded, his eyes reflecting a quiet pride of his own. Marcus, who had been listening from the corner, grinned widely. "Well," he said, "looks like this shop just got a promotion." The three men shared a laugh, but beneath it was something deeper: trust, understanding, and a shared sense of purpose. In that small workshop, surrounded by tools and the smell of oil, a new chapter began. The man who once looked down on others now stood beside them, building not just engines, but bridges, proof that respect could turn strangers into partners, and mistakes into beginnings. Months later, the small repair shop that once looked worn and forgotten had transformed into something remarkable. The fresh sign above the entrance read Haynes and Eli Motors, built with honor. It shone brightly under the morning sun, a symbol of two very different men who had learned to see beyond pride and circumstance. The sound of tools clinking, engines humming, and friendly laughter filled the air each day. Customers now came not only for repairs, but also for the warmth that lingered in the atmosphere, something genuine and human that couldn't be bought with money. Mr. Haynes often arrived early, no longer in his sharp suits, but in simple clothes, ready to lend a hand or share a story. Eli worked beside him, calm and steady as always, his quiet strength commanding respect without a word. Marcus remained a loyal friend, greeting customers and joking that he was management now. Though everyone knew he was the heart that kept the place grounded, the three of them had built more than a business. They had built trust, equality, and friendship. People in the neighborhood still talked about the day it all began, the hot afternoon, when a rich man's car broke down on a dusty road, and arrogance met humility face to face. Many said that what happened next was a miracle, not of money or fame, but of character. They remembered how a single mechanic's calm dignity and a friend's bold defense had shaken a man's pride so deeply that it changed his life. Mr. Haynes often caught himself thinking about that moment, how his careless words had once revealed the worst in him, and how the strength of two ordinary men had brought out the best instead. Standing in the new workshop, watching Eli teach a young apprentice how to handle a wrench carefully, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Peace. He realized that true wealth wasn't measured in the cars he owned or the companies he built, but in the respect he gave and received. The name on the sign wasn't just a partnership. It was a promise to honor every worker, every hand that built something real. On quiet evenings, when the sun dipped low and painted the walls with gold, the three men would sit outside, sharing stories and laughter. To anyone passing by, they looked like lifelong friends, equal in every sense. But to those who knew the story, that sight meant something deeper. It was a reminder that no heart is beyond change, and no lesson is too small to shape a man's soul. And so, on that same dusty road where pride once spoke louder than kindness, a new legacy began, one built, not with wealth or titles, but with humility, respect, and the courage to change.